I didn't work through that when I was younger either. I pretty much like took that, like balled it up and then just like, stuck it right on my backpack, my metaphorical backpack. And I just carried that weight around for like years, man, like years and years until I went off on this long bike ride where I really, being so removed from everything and like just being on a bike all the time, like gives a lot of space for thoughts to roam, and that was really when I started to break down some of that.
That's Brendan Walsh. He's an adventure athlete who holds the world record for the fastest crossing of America by bicycle, one of the great feats of endurance he's taken on in the name of raising mental health awareness.
I was just like out there surviving, and like people would see me and they'd be like, oh, like, yo, what are you doing, man? Which was great because it opens up a lot of opportunities for conversation for people to be really honest with you, because you're very unthreatening when you're just like a sweaty lycra donned dude on a bike in the middle of nowhere.
Brendan's just published a book chronicling his remarkable journey from his long struggle with mental illness and suicidal ideation to taking on the world on his bike.
It's about my mental health journey and honoring my friends and really just trying to be as open as I can be in my story to hopefully show somebody like me or not like me who can just really just relate.
Brendan's lost friends to suicide and very nearly lost himself, but he's still here and he's on a mission to help make a change.
Your mental health is so essential to not just your own well-being, but to the well-being of the people that love and care about you. And I think that's a damn good reason to put in some hard work, man.
Welcome to Young Blood, an award-winning podcast on a mission to make the mental health of young men a top priority. My name's Callum McPherson, I'm a journalist, and this is our platform to open up and share stories of what we've been through, because we're not alone. Let's do it. Before we kick this off, I just want to say thanks so much to everyone who's taken 15 to 90 seconds out of their day to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. It boosts us up the ranks massively and makes a huge difference to how many people we can reach with these potentially life-saving stories. So thank you. And for those who haven't got around to it, please, if Young Blood has delivered you some value, let us know on there. Cheers, legends. Trigger warning, if you find anything spoken about in today's episode distressing, please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14.
So Brendan, when did you first become aware that you were struggling with your mental health?
It's got to be my motorcycle accident that I had in 2014. It was the first time where I was forced to just stop and be and not do any sort of physical movement at all. And, once for me, I'm a very, fidgety dude. So like when I'm in motion, that's generally when I feel like I'm thinking my clearest thoughts. And it gave me this open space in my head to explore places that I never really went before, really didn't know about until this kind of started to elevate it in my life,
And so what happened when you were forced to stop and reflect?
I never really thought that I could do anything about it. It was ever since I was like a little kid, I always thought like when I was 40, like I was just going to inevitably kill myself. And, that kind of number just like dwindled down and down and down as I got older, constantly having like suicidal ideation as a kid, but never really connecting any dots or like knowing that anyone had ever like felt this way or like gone through it or anything like that. So being forced to stop kind of literally removed me from where I was. I was living in Boston at the time, and I was just involved in some like nefarious activity, and all my friends, like everybody I was with, like we're all doing the same shit. And I was taken out of that, so it gave me this time where I like wasn't partying like every moment of every day. And I actually was like starting to wipe away the cobwebs in my mind, like clean out the musty old basement mind that I had then.
So when you were a lot younger and you're struggling with suicidal ideation and feeling depressed and all that, like what do you put that down to? Is that something that's been in your family, or did you have a very tough life growing up? Like what were the things that fed into you feeling like that as such a young person?
Yeah, man, I come from, I have a very common theme, and in America where it's like mixed families and stuff like that. And I'm super blessed, like to have, awesome parents and stuff, but it was like this mixed, it was like the Brady Bunch that wasn't made for TV,
Okay.
where you had these people, all these siblings, and I always felt like I was causing, just my birth was like causing a rift in this, and in the relationships of everything, and just like, the core of my existence was questioned even from a young kid, just by feeling like, just by being born into this family, I caused all of these things, all of them to feel whatever sort of way in their lives, even though I didn't know at the time that wasn't me. It was just my feelings of that, and all of, the battling that can happen in situations like that.
Mm. And how were you raised? Like, was it a loving, sort of supportive home that you were in, and I guess the town that you grew up in as well? Like, obviously, to be having suicidal ideation as a young kid, such an extreme thing. Was it something that you understood at all why it was happening, or did it just happen for a period of years and you were just always confused by it, but accepted that that was just sort of how your brain worked? Or how do you explain that?
Yeah, man, I would say it wasn't really until maybe like a couple years after that motorcycle accident where it really actually clicked, that it wasn't just this inevitability. It was something that I had like control of, and then became like consciously aware of. I have great parents, and great friends and all that, but it was a very small town with like not much opportunity, and it's the people who you surround yourself with, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of those kids, had folks who, were addicted to drugs. Having my family where, there's like generational trauma, like from both sides of my father and my mother, there was a lot of pent up emotions that were never really had quite an outlet for,
Yeah.
until I got older and realized that, like, oh, when I am feeling this way, there's an applicable solution to it, and not just like spin out into like some sort of manic moment.
Yeah, so a lot of trauma and not a lot of prospects, and a lot of relating to those around you who are also feeling fairly negative, and sort of sounds like perhaps feeding each other in quite a negative way, or all thinking like life wasn't going to get better, or you were doomed to sort of repeat the same patterns or stay in the same place, and then that fed into quite a negative headspace.
Oh yeah, totally, man.
And so you use drugs and alcohol throughout your teenage years to deal with these sorts of feelings. Like, that was part of your friendship group and just the way that you dealt with being alive. Like, where did that sort of lead?
Yeah, that mainly happened once I went off to college, actually, brother. When I didn't really have anyone at all, and then I lost my friend to suicide freshman year of college, and that really, like, it was one of those things, bro. Like, as a kid, we had like a falling out with a friend group, and like, I'm kind of like downplaying it, like totally dismantled like my entire social thing, just because he decided he didn't like me. And like, in hindsight, it was probably more of like a call for help, because I was more aware of those things. And then once he took his own life, that was really the domino, like the first domino that went down, where it was like all of them have been lining up for years, and like now they're starting to trickle and fall. And that's really where that began.
Sorry that happened to you.
We're all 18, heading off to college. He went off to one, I went off to Boston, where I spent the next, decade plus. And though we were separated, like I came from a really small town, and then it was like, it sent an absolute like nuclear bomb through that place, man. And it like had a very heavy effect on a lot of people who I've rekindled friendships with since then. And I know like sometimes that I can kind of tell them like, yo, you haven't like really worked through much of that at all.
Yeah. How did it affect you?
I felt a weird sense of, I don't want to say like gratitude, because that's like kind of fucked up to say about it, but like him doing that, like in a way I felt kind of saved me at that time period, as twisted as that sounds, because it was like, I saw what happens after that, right?
Yeah.
where
And
like
you'd been
most people just
considering
can
it on and
imagine
off
things.
to that time? Like you've obviously been considered doing,
Oh, absolutely,
yeah. And
dude.
did
Yeah.
that ramp up as you went off to college and you were about to move off to college? Did that intensify for you personally as well in terms of thinking about doing that yourself?
Oh yeah, and like I didn't work through that when I was younger either. I pretty much like took that, like balled it up and then just like, stuck it right on my backpack, my metaphorical backpack, and I just carried that weight around for like years, man, like years and years until I went off on this long bike ride where I really, being so removed from everything and like just being on a bike all the time, like gives a lot of space for thoughts to roam, and that was really when I started to break down some of that.
Yeah. So when your friend died and you saw the impact that suicide has, that made you view it differently?
I saw it and it really wasn't like I will never do this yet. It was still at a point where it was like, oh, that is a part of the process, like that is just like, everyone, everybody dies, but not everybody realizes that everybody dies. And like in that moment as a young kid where you're like, oh, I thought that dude was invincible,
Yeah.
and then for something like that to happen.
Yeah, because it is a life-changing moment, and I've experienced the same thing. I lost a friend to suicide a few years ago. Obviously, you know that everyone dies, but until you lose someone suddenly who it certainly wasn't their time yet, that's what really shocks you and makes you sort of rocks your world, and you realize like, wow, we're not invincible, especially at that time of being a young man, late teenage years into your early 20s. You really do think you're invincible, like that stereotype that all young men think they're invincible, but you really do through that time. And for me personally, like losing a mate was probably the strongest friend that I had, physically and mentally, I thought in lots of ways, was mind blowing, because it was like, oh wow, like that can really happen. And then that makes you grow up a bit in a way, hopefully makes you appreciate more your own life, and brings a bit of seriousness to it as well, because you realize for the first time, like it's shown right in front of your eyes, this will actually happen if you don't look after yourself, if you allow yourself to go down a certain path, like it can all end today. And actually being confronted with that is like, fuck, you know?
Yeah, dude.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's those moments like, like you're saying, the strongest dude, like it makes everything seem so much more fragile in that moment, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. It shows you the fragility of life. It's like, well, if that can happen to someone that I consider to be one of the strongest, then it can definitely happen to me. And although we're not necessarily selfish creatures, we always see ourselves in other people, and we know that that could be you. And it just makes you sort of view your entire life and everything differently. And you're like, wow, I'm actually only here for a short period of time. That can be taken away at any time. And I need to be grateful, make the most of what I've got, and try to help other people right now, because this is actually this is real. This is a serious thing,
Yeah.
When did you find the bike? Like, when did you start riding? Had you always done that, or did you just pick it up one day?
From like a little kid, I used to just run. Like I would get off the bus, I would come home and I would just run a 5K like every single day. And I played soccer year round. That was like a huge part of my life. I did wrestling and then inevitably did track, where I was like pretty successful through high school and all that, but gave it up when I went to college, and because I went to art school, and they don't have sports in art school, man.
Yeah.
So like I lost this outlet that I didn't realize was so important to me, and like keeping me out of so much trouble that I could have been in just by having like so much free time. I say this all the time about humans, is like, we're the most flawed creatures on this planet and we have the most free time.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like the
It's a dangerous combination.
It is, man. Yeah, it's like the perfect storm right there. It wasn't until the motorcycle accident, really, because I've been going through 3 or 4 years after that, lost another friend to suicide, lost another friend to a drug overdose. And, these things continually racking up. And like what I kept doing instead of like working through them was just like drinking a shit ton and like doing drugs and stuff like that. Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
was going to the gym
Yeah, but it's
and like
easier. It's
doing
easier
body.
to just do that and not try to process it all because it's so much, especially losing multiple friends like that in a fairly short period of time. There's so much to deal with, and you'd already experienced it once with your friend when you were younger, and you've got other
Mhm.
things going on in your life. And I think that the temptation, which is perfectly understandable for people, is just to shut it down and not process it because it just seems too hard and too painful. But obviously, that catches up with you in the end.
Oh, totally, man. I mean, what's like, what's easier is like grabbing a beer out of the fridge or like going for a run, you know?
Yeah.
So when you're like most people when given that time and like especially in that moment of weakness, you know, like they're gonna pick the easier thing.
Choosing the easy road eventually becomes the hard road. Like it seems like when it's in front of us and we have the chance to choose vice or choose something that's virtuous in terms of how we cope with a situation, the easy road, it will seem like that's going to be the easiest way to heal our pain or take us away from the pain or just make us feel comfortable in the moment. But ultimately, making those decisions again and again and again will actually put you in a very hard place.
Hmm. Yeah, you think you're like, oh, you're like, oh, I moved through that, and it's really like, no, you're just kind of like putting another brick on this wall that you're inevitably gonna have to climb, right?
Yeah.
Like at some point you're gonna smash into that wall, dude, and like those are the moments where like, are you gonna like try to get back up and get over it, or like are you just gonna give up,
Yeah.
you know? And making that conscious decision to like try to get your ass up over that wall is like that's a I mean, you got to practice that, dude, you know? Like that's a
It's a muscle.
that's a yeah, for sure. Like resilience is most definitely a muscle, and moving forward and like physically moving through space piece is like that's the easy part, dude. Like we've
Yeah.
been doing that for like hundreds of thousands of years, right?
What's been your experience of being faced with those moments of, am I going to give up or am I going to stand and deliver and turn it around here? Like, how long did you push that stuff away for and ignore it and continue to drink and try and chuck a band-aid on it and forget about it? And like, where did that go and how did that stop? And then you decided to change your life.
Yeah, it was after that motorcycle accident, I found my old mountain bike in my basement, in my parents' basement, dude. And I just like rode it a little bit further and then like rode it a little bit further. And I just did that, you know, time and time again. And then I don't know what it was. It was like a faint whisper where it was ride your bike across the country, you know? And I like couldn't get this idea out of my head, dude.
Yeah, okay.
So I bought a steel frame touring bike and then just strapped like way too much stuff on it and left to ride from Boston to Seattle, you know, carrying.
So how quickly
just
did
a
you make
10
that decision from hearing that voice in your head saying you should ride across the country to then strapping the stuff to your bike and heading off? Like how long did it take you to make that call?
A lot of people can vouch for this that like when I get into something, I get like super into something,
Yeah,
dude.
yeah.
So it was pretty much like from that moment, it took about like a little over a year. You know, like I was about to go off and do it. And then I got a better job. So it bumped it up like a couple months, you know, and it was pretty much like within a year and a half of that. So like from the motorcycle accident, it was like less than 2 years in total where
Yeah.
I just went off and left, you know, I just left, dude.
So when you started out on that, like how do you even approach trying to ride a bike across the country? Like how did that look and what was your plan? What did people say to you about doing that?
Well, I was doing so the year before my grandmother passed away from skin cancer, and what I did was I wanted to honor her through this ride, so I decided to raise money for St. Jude's Children's Hospital. And you know, because I was doing it like that, a lot of people were like, "Yeah, you can do it." But like after I finished, a lot of people afterwards were like, "Dude, I didn't. I thought you were gonna make it to like Buffalo and quit."
Yeah.
You know,
Because it's pretty ambitious, man. How far is that?
that was like a little over 4,000 miles, dude.
Wow. Yeah.
Like I never had done a single overnight trip before. Like I bought a tent and a travel size guitar and I strapped it to my bike and left.
Man, that's so romantic.
That's really what it was. It was like the modern day manifest destiny, really,
Yeah.
just like head west, young man.
Yeah, that's so cool. How did you feel when you were doing that?
In the time where it was just me, and I had run out of food and I'd run out of water, and I was just like stuck in the Adirondack Mountains of New York. And I mean, this was like day 5. And in that moment, it was like, do I do something about this or do I quit?
Yeah.
And in that moment, I was like, I have to do something about this, because I made this thing bigger than myself, which I felt gave me this power to continue at times, even
Yeah.
though that power was really my own, though.
That's the key, man. I definitely relate to that. I think that's one incredible example, your trip. But I think anything that we take on, whether it's a project or a job or something that we're passionate about, where we do get the power to continue it and build it if it's about more than just us, like if it's about serving a higher purpose or a bigger idea, like you for honoring your grandmother and raising that money, it does give you strength to continue, rather than if it was just like, I'm just doing this thing because I think it's cool, whatever. That's not going to be enough.
Yeah.
But if it's like people are counting on me, they're relying on me, other people get something out of this, then I totally agree with you. We do get like an extra boost of strength for that can see us through.
Oh yeah, it's undeniable, dude. Like, because chasing accomplishments is hollow, like anyone who like does things for the sake of doing them, like, yeah, it'll make you a better person and you'll like hopefully learn about yourself to make you a better person along the way. But if you're just doing it to like hang something up on your wall, like I think you're doing it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you were in the mountains and you had to make a decision to do something, otherwise you were gonna, I don't know, get eaten by bears or something like that.
Pretty realistic.
What did you do that day?
I went on, brother. Like I remember coming up to this barn, and I was like, just got out of the shade for a second because I was looking at the road signs and like I was hallucinating. At like one moment there were 5, and then it was 40 miles per hour, and then 30 and 40, and it was like changing numbers. And I just decided to just press on to the next town. And I got to this bar where it was one of those scenes where like you open the door and it's the only place in town, and this is like the mountains. It was like no one lives here, bro. And I like opened the door like and like everyone's like and like looks at you,
Yeah.
and I just like, I'm a dirty dude in spandex that walks into the bar in this place, and I just like sit down, and then I started talking to some people there. And I mean, you have, I see, man, you got like 2 sleeves and stuff. Like it's a lot more, people know now that like generally those are the nicest people.
Yeah.
Because those are all my friends in hardcore bands growing up. But like most people are like, I don't know about that guy.
Yeah. Definitely.
So like I go up to the bar and I like talk to that guy and his wife, and we just start like, I was so freaked out in that moment before. I just kind of end up being like, okay, like, I can keep doing this thing, by a little bit extra hype from these 2 mountain folks. And I ended up sleeping on the lawn of this historical building. And just being like, you know what, just wake up tomorrow and see what you can do. And then it really just became a process of that, man, being like, dude, you're not going to ride 4,000 miles on this like way too heavy bike right now in one day. You just got to like wake up and see what you can do that day and just put in your best effort, you know? And that's exactly what I did the next day, man.
So that's a real metaphor for life then. That must have hit home pretty strongly for you. What was going through your head a lot of the time during that ride in terms of processing?
I mourned the loss of my grandmother, and it was almost like a vision quest, the Native American tradition where like, you go on this journey to like find yourself and like become a man. And that's really what like my journey was for that trip when I rode to Seattle from Boston. Yeah.
And you did that in a really raw way, like so intense that you literally went off into the wilderness by yourself. Like it's pretty stereotypical, but it must have just been incredible. How did that experience shape you and change you overall?
Yeah, that was 2017, and it was just a series of, like just try, get up, dust yourself off, and like move forward. Like I got on that trip, dude, I got literally like the bird flu. I slept in this pavilion out in this 50-person town in North Dakota, like total flyover state or whatever. And I got like the bird flu, and I lost a bunch of weight and just decided to keep going, and then sprained my ankle and just taped it up and decided to keep going. And then I realized like, oh, you can apply that to so many different things in life. And, that was 2017. I finished that in the end of July of that year. And then through the course of 2018.
What would you say were the most memorable moments of that ride?
Wild horses, man. Wild horses. I can like smell this memory. Coming up this long, windy mountain road in Montana, heading to Glacier National Park. And I see this dude on a Harley, and he's like going like this, like telling me to like slow down. And I'm like, I'm going like 10, man, like not even, I'm already going pretty slow. And I just like start to feel this rumble. And there's a pack of like 10 wild horses, man, just like trotting down the road, and you just like shaking, and I'm like looking at them. I'm just like, they're so big, man, and so muscular. And I'm like, what do you do with wild horses? Because like you're going through your head, and like you're like a bear, do this, and tiger, do this, and I'm like, what do you do with wild horses? And I just like, I'm like holding onto my bike, and at the last minute they're like, and just like cut across this field right in front of me. Yeah,
full on. So you thought you were going to get trampled?
That happens, like that much mass, and like really just collective identity of the wild horses. Like they'd stomp out my 150-pound body in like a half a second.
It would have been cool once they went past and you realized you weren't going to die though. So what did that do for your self-confidence by the end of that trip? Like what was it like to finish that and cross the finish line and get to Boston and then realize that you'd done that? Like who were you at the end of that trip compared to the start?
Yeah, it was that became my process of just kind of like asking myself, like, why not me? And then it was like, oh, I could probably do that. And I could probably do that. Like right when I finished, I went and it's supposed to be like the hardest hill climb in the world, they say, Mount Washington in New Hampshire. I rode that same heavy ass bike up Mount Washington like a couple weeks later. Wow. I was like, I cannot believe I actually did that. And then it was like, I could probably run a marathon. And I was like, I could probably teach myself how to swim a couple miles. And I was like, I could probably do a half Ironman. And then like by the end of 2018, like all of those things have been done in a couple of months just by being like, I could probably do this. And Amazing. Then all of a sudden, like I rode my bike 200 miles.
Did you notice that voice in your head was very different to the one that had been there the rest of your life? Like had that voice in the past said you probably couldn't do that or you shouldn't do that, and then that flipped to, yeah, you probably could?
Oh yeah, because it was for me like I'm my own worst critic, and like such a loud in my head kind of way, dude, where it was like if it wasn't, if I actually cared about something and it wasn't 100%, then it was nothing, so it was like, why even try, why even bother? Like it was a whole like you need to suffer for your art kind of thing, which is I still slightly believe in some degree, but like accomplishing those things without any sort of like, oh, this thing, oh, that thing, is like, no, dude, you rode your bicycle, your heavy ass bike all the way across the country. You did that. And then being able to like look back at that and just knowing that there's, so much power to the story right there. Just like knowing that you write your own story, you know, like I could have quit at any time on that ride, but that wasn't what I wanted to write. That wasn't the book that I wanted, my life to be. And then that was really what propelled me, being like, oh, like, just, dude, you did that. Like, why not try this? Why not try this?
And you realize that the only change there is the switch being flicked in your own mind and realizing that actually, yes, I can, changing that narrative. And I'm fascinated by the fact that as humans, whatever we tell ourselves in our head, whatever that narrative and that story is, that does become true. Like obviously there's a lot of external things that we don't control, but whatever you're telling yourself as to who you are or who you're going to become, that will ultimately manifest, which is makes logical sense. Like, it's not really a mystical thing. It's just, if you truly believe something and then you act accordingly, your life's going to follow in the way that you want it to. But once you really believe that and you start to give yourself actual evidence of it happening, and then you can look back and say, well, I've got this reference point from this last thing I wanted to do. That was a massive challenge. I didn't think I could do it, but I did do it. So I guess I'm the person that does do things and can get the job done. And then someone poses another challenge and your brain thinks, yeah, I probably could. And then before you know it, after another year of completing more challenges, and these challenges, obviously, it's about the principle of completing it and being the person who finishes and does what they say they're going to do. And then you're this other person.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, absolutely. Because when I got there, like, I was the same dude, like I said, it was like, my coming of age story, if you will. But like, ultimately, I was like still the same dude. I just had ridden my bike like kind of far.
Yeah. But you weren't the same dude, though. Like once you go through that storm, like, you're not the same person. That's the point of the storm,
Yeah, exactly. The growth, it's like, I remember like the first 5 days of that trip, man, where it snowed the day I left, because I left in May. It snowed, and then it was just cold, wet rain for like 5 days. And I was like, if this is how it's going to be the whole time, I don't know like what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then, one sunny day happened and it like picked me back up. And then that's when I realized, like, just like life, like, there's going to be rainy days, but there's going to be a lot more sunny days than there are going to be rainy days. And, through that time, that absolutely rang true. You know, I just knew that, it's such a cliche now, but like the whole, like, hard times don't last.
Yeah.
Like,
tough people
hard people do.
Yeah.
And like that, and that was really, really what it was,
Yeah. And you can't have the sunshine without the rain as well. It seems like all of this trip and all these things you've done have just been this massive metaphor for the rest of your life. And it sounds like a movie. I know you've written a book about it, and it sounds very worthy to write a book about something like this, but just seeing these patterns everywhere of you realizing, like, oh, this is a metaphor for the rest of my life. And that really shows me how that works. And it's just coming across really strongly. So you ended up doing all these other endurance tests and doing an Ironman, I believe. And then you did another bike ride. So like, what's been your goals throughout those years?
After that, that year, 2018, I was like, I wanted to change something in the mental health narrative, and that's when I decided in 2019 that I wanted to like raise money for the National Alliance of Mental Illness, also known as NAMI, who had all these great programs for folks of any age, creed, etc., to support, like, everybody's mental health and that. So I decided to try something new and try to give back to the ultra endurance community that like ultimately gave me so much, like talking about building my confidence and all that. So I decided to try and set the Guinness World Record for the fastest crossing of the United States from north to south by bicycle. And, that was something where, like, I told you, it was like, you do this thing, you get a little bit better. You do this thing, you get a little bit better. And I was doing the things until May of 2019, when I was out for my typical training ride. I would ride to Walden Pond every day, like Henry David Thoreau.
Yeah.
I would ride to Walden and back every morning, a part of like the 60 plus miles I was doing, and, hour in the gym. Like, I was training, I was riding my bike 400 plus miles and lifting weights like 5 to 7 hours a week at this point. And I was like, oh, like, I'm doing the steps. Like, I'm going to, in a month, that was the original start date in June, I'm going to smash this record. Like, I've thought about it. I've planned it out, blah, blah, blah. And then bang, it was a 50-mile-per-hour collision head on. This Audi just smashed into the front end of my bike. And it was just like an aluminum airbag, man. I got the whole front end collapsed in on itself. I get tossed over the handlebars. All I really remember is the sound of just glass shattering.
Shit.
And then just like, I was on the ground, and just like in that moment, I was like, all of this is ruined and blah, blah, blah. And like, funny note, like, one person that came by, like, stopped. It was like morning traffic in Boston, which is wild. And she stops and she's like, don't worry, I'm a nurse. And I'm like, that's the
It's
most
not going to help.
convenient thing that could have happened right there. But that really was the beginning of like my mindfulness journey, really. Because after that I had such PTSD, brother, that like I was stuck in my living room with a black hoodie with the hood up, all the lights drawn. Like I was afraid to go outside for like a week. I was just so like ultimately just terrified of the world. And then
What happened to your
started
body?
meditating. Oh, dude, I had obviously a concussion, one of many now. I actually got hit by a car a couple months earlier, the day after the Super Bowl, and got a concussion too. I didn't get messed
All
up,
right,
but
dude.
like that was concussion 2 in a couple months. I tore my meniscus. I had a hell of a bone bruise that was like directly from the doctor. I sprained my ankle, and then like, obviously just my whole body was just riddled with knots,
Yeah.
from head to toe.
But you're pretty lucky though, sounds like.
Oh, dude, I was extremely lucky. Like, I'm very lucky that I have been lifting weights up to that point, because I remember hearing a story a couple weeks later where this old guy just collided with another guy on a bicycle on one of the, the rail trail paths, and that dude died. So like I was terrified and ultimately so grateful, which was like kind of like fed into that. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so lucky to be alive, and blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
all these things that I was like, I couldn't get out of this like negative feedback loop in my head.
How did you get
until
out of it?
I started meditation, man. Meditation, like it was finally what calmed my nervous system down, and then it had me being able to like think about like, okay, like what's next, And I went to the police station to pick up my bike, and it was just this like, oh, I have pictures of it still that I show in my keynotes, where it's like handlebars are collapsed and it's just like pretzel of aluminum. And I had so many people, because I announced this big thing. I was like, hey, I'm doing this big thing. Like, you kind of got to announce these things, otherwise you get no traction to them.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, like patting me on the back. They're like, oh, nice try, man. You'll get them next time. But I had this one guy say to me that adventure doesn't lie in the road ahead of you. It lies in your heart. And that's just like lit this fire underneath me, dude. And I hit PT so hard. I started riding the bike I rode cross country again, and had this miraculous recovery from this stuff. Like all of the PTs, like all of my doctors were like, we literally don't understand how you healed yourself so fast from this. So I built myself back up, and then ultimately took on the challenge in the end of September of 2019. So like you're talking about like getting knocked down and getting back up again. Like I had to completely like push it off in your head too, to regain all this fitness, get an entire bike back, like all of this stuff, and work through that trauma to just get to the start line, man. Get to the start line of this thing. Like I hadn't even started the hardest thing I was ever going to do in my life up to that point.
Yeah. And then once you did get to the start though, you must have thought, well, I'm definitely going to complete it now, because it's already been this hard to get here. So it would have given you that extra boost of, well, I'm not going to stop now. And it seems like that's what you've really won through all this, is that mindset and that feeling in your heart of, if you truly believe something and you're going to go after it, then no one's going to stop you but you.
Oh, totally, man. Those silicone bracelets that folks have, like the Live Strong ones? Like, it's a very common thing that we do something to honor people we love. Like we had these bracelets made with their name on it. And before I left, I took that bracelet out and I put it on, and I put on the other one of my other friend who had committed suicide. That was when I first got into the processing of those emotions. Every time I looked at my wrist, it was there, And on day one of that ride, trapped in a tunnel of evergreen trees in frigid northern Maine, where I started, is when I first just broke down, just shouting into the sky, man, saying like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to my friends and all these things.
And you made it through that trip.
I did. It was, 11 days, 9.5 hours from the tip of Maine all the way down to the buoy in Key West. That was my way to honor my friends and to work through it myself, because it was a Guinness World Record and you had to have like an official start time, official end time, things that take away from the essence of why you're doing something.
Yeah.
But I remember just like slapping my hand with those bracelets on, just like this thunderous slap onto the buoy. It was like, man, like it wasn't like it didn't matter, but it was like I felt like I did my thing to work through this, you know.
Hell yeah, like you sort of exercised those demons and you did so much work to get to that point and truly honored them, and I suppose would have gone through so much on that ride processing that and doing it so fast as well. Like that must have been very hectic, riding all day, every day, getting up and just like blazing the trail, I guess, because other people have attempted that, I think, in the past, but you're the fastest ever. So how did you find that experience overall, like managing to actually pull that off?
Well, I'd never done anything like that before. Like I said, like I'd done similar things, but nothing like that, you know. It was, you know, and this is why I like ultra endurance so much, is like it strips us away of like all the ego, all the everything, you know, and it shows your truest self, because you're in such a vulnerable state, you know, like just day after day after day, you know, and just like literally just like I went from, you know, the top of Maine, like being all in one piece, to the end, like I had this thing called cyclist palsy, where you crush the ulnar nerve in your hand. So I had crab claws. My hands were like stuck like this.
Shit.
For months afterwards too.
Far
like
out.
I remember I lost my gloves in Connecticut in the rain because it was just wild. And I remember like trying to open up a new pack of gloves in like Virginia, and I was like pawing at it with my silly putty hands, like couldn't open it. And the dude was like, "Do you need some help?" And that kind of like continued, where like people would see this dude who was like, at that point, like I became like feral, you know, like
Yeah.
I was just like out there surviving, and like people would see me and they'd be like, "Oh, like, yo, what are you doing, man?" Which was great because it opens up a lot of opportunities for conversation, for people to be really honest with you, because you're very unthreatening when you're just like a sweaty lycra donned dude on a bike in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, because they're like, this guy's not going to do anything. He's obviously exhausted and hungry. Although that might mean that he will. That might make him attack.
Yeah, he's got nothing to lose, man. He's crazy.
Yeah. And so then you wrote a book about this whole experience that you've had, because it's been a wild ride this last 5 years or so of your life. So just tell us a bit about the book.
Yeah, so I wrote the book over the course of, you know, like a couple months. I actually wrote the entire book. I wrote this entire book on my iPhone with my thumbs, because I had that cyclist palsy, like an over 200-page book, man.
So you could only use your thumbs.
The entire thing in a note, entirely with my thumbs, dude, and one note on my iPhone.
Wow, lucky that didn't get deleted.
Oh yeah, I know. I was extremely neurotic about that. Just like I did it very Kerouac-esque, because that was truly like, I think like if I were to pull like some straws, some threads in the, you know, the fabric of my being, like I read On the Road in college, and then I wanted to hitchhike across the country, and like Kerouac's been a really big inspiration to me. So like I feel like maybe he planted a seed in there. So I like sat down, and I never wrote a book about the cross country ride, and I was like, this ride is far more worth writing about because of why I did it. You know, so it's about my mental health journey and honoring my friends, and really just trying to be as open as I can be in my story, to hopefully show somebody like me or not like me who can just really just relate on any note to this, that, you know, they're not alone in the struggles that they're having.
So incredible what you've done, man, and like just beautiful words. How is that, especially that last ride, how did that change your mental health or make you able to cope with yourself differently? And how has that been able to continue on as you've gotten older since that point?
Yeah, it definitely added some tools, you know, into my toolbox, you know, like, you know, it's not all about just doing the ultra endurance stuff, right? Like, because the saying of, if you only have a hammer, the whole world is a nail, you know, it was like, it added a bunch of tools to my toolbox, and it kind of helped me realize that, like, I met this dude in South Carolina. He had just been taken out of the hospital. He was bipolar. He tried to kill himself. Like, he told me his whole story at like 1 a.m. in this hotel. And he's like, oh man, I wish I could just get on my bike and just like ride off into the sunset like you. And I was like, that's not what happened here, man. I was like, this is just like, this is a way I cope with this. This is a way I deal with it, and it's like, I look at it as recovery, and not just like this Sisyphus perception of like, I keep needing to push this stuff up the hill, just this rock over and over and over. It really taught me that like, if you want something, it's going to be a lot of work, and your mental health is so essential to not just your own well-being, but to the well-being of the people that love and care about you. And I think that's a damn good reason to put in some hard work, man.
Hell yeah, man. That's so well said, and an awesome way to wrap that up. So where can people find this book if they want to read it? Because I want to read it after talking to you.
Yeah, man, I'll make sure to send you a digital copy. It's kind of hard to ship stuff across the whole globe right now.
Yeah.
But folks can find me. I'm Bicycle Brendan on Instagram, Facebook, all that. On my website, bicyclebrendan.com. You can buy my book from there. I sell clothes that I ultimately donate portions to charity for as well. And I just recently got it up on Amazon and Kindle and all that stuff as well.
Awesome. What's the next goal now? You've got a bigger challenge?
Oh yeah. So, you always got to raise the stakes a little bit higher, man. So I did that. I ran 100 miles in 24 hours to wrap up the final fundraiser of that. That was a 10K for an Ami project. We raised $10,000. And now I'm building up onto something pretty exciting for 2022. It's going to be a whole lot of swimming, a whole lot of biking, and a whole lot of running though. And obviously it's all going to be for a very good cause.
I know that no matter what it is, you'll get the job done because you're the man.
Thank you, brother. Back at you, man. And thank you for having a space like this for the most at-risk group who are constantly told that like, oh, just toughen up. You know what I mean? And for you to do this is really important. And I hope you know how much things like your work is appreciated as well, dude.
Thanks so much, man. And I absolutely love being able to talk to people across the world like yourself and have these kinds of conversations. It's an absolute privilege, bro. So thanks so much for joining me and doing what you do. And I look forward to following your journey and seeing you do even more crazy stuff.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate the opportunity to spread that good word, dude.
That's it for this episode. If you're getting some value out of the show, please help us out with a quick rate and review on Apple Podcasts. Everything we do is recorded in video, so follow Youngblood Men's Mental Health on Instagram and Facebook, and Youngblood Mental Health on TikTok. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Youngblood Media, and please leave us a comment or send us a message if these stories resonate. We'd love to hear from you. And most importantly, please share the podcast with anyone in your life who might need it. We're all about reaching as many people as we can. This is Youngblood. Thanks for being part of the mission. Catch you next time.